Debate and diplomacy after World War I. In January 1919, the fighting nations came together in Paris for a peace conference. 5 treaties would be debated at the conference, one for each of the Central Powers. The most vital one was the Treaty of Versailles, which was between the Allies and Germany.
While the Treaty of Versailles did not present a peace agreement that made all the parties happy, once President Woodrow Wilson returned to the United States and presented his 14 points, Americans favored the treaty immediately, including the League of Nations. 32 state governments passed their versions in support of the treaty, but there was much anger and rejection of it within the Senate, which we needed to ratify it before it could act on the United States. The Treaty of Versailles was 7 votes short of institution, but the United States signed a different treaty with Germany.
President Wilson introduced his 14 points in some large parts of the treaty. His points included things like diplomacy is supposed to be public with no secret treaties, all nations should enjoy free navigation of the seas, free trade should exist among all nations, putting an end to economic barriers between countries. All countries should reduce arms in the name of public safety. The USA's responses to the treaty were commonly unapproving. A lot of Americans thought that the treaty was not fair to Germany.
More importantly, they thought that Britain and France were getting themselves rich at Germany's expenses and that the USA could not assist them in doing this. This, however, was not the case, but a lot of Americans believed it. This was mostly because American politics were very separated at the time. President Wilson was the head of the Democratic Party.
However, his enemies on the Republican side controlled the Congress. They used the treaty as a reason to critique Wilson. Wilson had to take the blame for this, considering he made no effort to talk to the Republicans about the treaty. Americans were uneasy about Wilson's plans for a League of Nations. They were worried that being a part of the League would bring the U.S. into worldwide disputes that did not involve them. In the end, Congress said no to the Treaty of Versailles and joined the League of Nations.
Responses to the treaty in Germany were also negative. There were large outrages in the German parliament and on the streets. It is not difficult to see why Germans were so angry. Germany got talked out of 10% of its land, all its international colonies, 12.5% of its people, 16% of its fuel, and 48% of its iron production. There were also the punishing terms for their future, in which Germany accepted blame for the war, limited their armed forces, and paid for reparations.
Responses in France were mixed. They were happy that the war was over. The people were okay with the reparations that Germany had to pay. They also enjoyed the fact that Germany's borders with France would be shrunk. This meant for France that Germany could not place any troops in that specific area. They also liked that the coal mines of the Saar would give money to the France instead of Germany.
They also thought that the League of Nations would be a large force for peace. It would keep France safe if Germany recovered and attempted to act hostile again. However, there was still a sense that Germany still intimidated France. Many French saw the huge cost of the war and thought that France had endured far more than Germany had.
A peace treaty was signed in 1918 at Brest, Belarus with Russia and also Germany, allowing Russia's exit from World War I. The Big Four of the Western nations, the US, Great Britain, France, and Italy, owned the peace debates in Paris. Germany and the losing countries, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey, are not represented at the conference. Neither was Russia, who had fought with the Allied powers until 1917, at which time the country's new executives decided on their peace treaty with Germany, excusing them from the conflict. Held in the town of Brest-Litovsk in Poland, the conference began in December. Trotsky led the Russian party. The German and Austrian parties were led by their secretaries Richard von Kuhlmann and Ottokar Zerman.
The last treaty with Austria was finished and put into action over 2 months after the Treaty with Germany. At this point, a lot of the main countries at the peace conference had left. The only two of the Big Four were America and Britain. The treaty in many ways was very similar to the Treaty of Versailles. Austria, like Germany, took responsibility for the war that they forced upon the Allies. War criminals were to be given to the Allied military. Austria's army would be limited to a small size and limits would be placed on ammo production.
The Treaty of Neuilly-sur-Seine was a peace agreement signed on the 27th of November in 1919 that made Bulgaria leave many territories. It was set up after Bulgaria's defeat. The treaty said that Bulgaria was to lose its land in Greece, Romania, and Yugoslavia, as well as its access to the Mediterranean. Like the other defeated countries, it was forced to shrink its army.
The Treaty of Trianon was signed by Hungary once World War I had ended. The treaty was made and put into action on June 4, 1920. The Treaty of Trianon said that the Allied and associated governments affirm that Hungary accepts the responsibility her and her allies for causing the loss and damage to which the Allied and associated governments have been subjected to, a consequence of the war imposed upon them by the aggression of Austria-Hungary and her allies.